Hello everybody, thank you so much for your support on the first 3 episodes of this series. Really quickly before we get going, I would like to plug my Patreon right here. I post every video on there a day early, and then I do post certain short videos on there a whole week in advance prior to the YouTube release. So if you would like to go down there and support me in any way you can, that would be lovely of you. And of course, if you haven't seen the first 3 videos that I've made on this show, please go onto my channel and watch those prior to watching this one, because you're just going to be really lost if you start here. Season 6 is actually not as bad as a lot of people say. In my opinion, it really does take like 4 to 5 episodes to really get going. Asking the audience to blindly follow you into insane time jumps and a wild amount of character introductions, not even to mention the fact that all the characters are on a new planet, is a very risky thing to do. I personally think that if the show had spent more time diving into the plot and mythology like they do later on in the season, rather than the first like 5 episodes being basically dedicated to Clark's new do-betterism, I would have liked it a lot more, and I think a lot of people would have liked it a lot more. I also think it's ridiculous that most of the characters this season judge Clark for what she did in season 5. All of those characters have very dark pasts and dark deeds that they've done as well, so it's kind of hypocritical in my opinion. The show wastes a bit of time in the first half of this season, but oh boy is the second half amazing. There's hardly any tension during the first few episodes, and it kind of feels like them just shitting all over season 5 and the huge stakes that season had. Season 6 still has stakes and major character reveals and all the dramatic stuff that the previous seasons have, but it also has the job of completely restarting the show and rebuilding from scratch. It's not really until like the midpoint of the season where it actually feels like they're doing the work to rebuild this season and this show from scratch. Like the first few episodes, for me, they're kind of just showing us a little bit about this new planet while everyone complains about Clark. And in a season that's only 13 episodes, there's very little time to waste. Like, this season would have benefited from having 16 episodes or even 20 episodes. I'm not going to be conservative with the number of episodes because I feel like if you're going to completely rebuild your show, doing it in 13 episodes where the first 5 episodes are essentially just filler is not sustainable. Season 7 is also very slow in the first half. I will get into that. And without further ado, let me take you to the whiteboard to show you the new additions. Alright, so Season 6 introduces us to a lot of new main characters and a lot of new side characters. Like, there's tons, you guys. Not even all of them are on the board right now. There's a couple that I'm waiting to put on the board because it'll make sense later. But starting out, we have Jordan Green. So Jordan Green is obviously Monty Green and Harper's son. So that's why he's in close proximity to them. The season also introduces us to Shade Haida, who is otherwise known as the Dark Commander. And as of this season, he still resides in the flame in Maddie's head. I'm not going to give too many spoilers away about his character at the moment, but just know that he is an entity in her mind. So next we have this big group, this huge group of people right here. There's actually 2 separate groups going on here. First, we have the Sanctumites, and that's anybody above this line, like these girlies right here. Within the Sanctumites, we have the Primes. So we have Russell Prime, Simone Prime, Josephine Prime, Riker Prime, and Kaylee Prime. We also have the children of Gabriel. Now these 2 are both a part of like a rebel group out in the woods here on this new planet. This rebel group follows a former Prime who ran away from being a god and kind of detests being a god, and they worship him. Then we have these 2 characters, which I thought it would be important to include them because they are just like the commoners in Sanctum, but they are kind of semi-important to the story, so I added them. So first we have Russell and Simone. They are the leaders in Sanctum, but there really is 4 families, 13 primes that all equally lead. We have their daughter named Josephine. Now Josephine is not technically alive as of the first couple episodes, but I'm gonna wait to reveal a bunch of stuff about her character, but you just stay seated because it's gonna get interesting. Next we have Kaylee and Riker. Kaylee is a part of the Lee family and Riker is a part of the Desai family, I think is how you pronounce it. Both of those 2 are primes and they are both alive as of episode 3. Episode 2 I think is when they first show up. Next we have have Jade, who is a part of the Royal Guard for Russell and the rest of the Primes. We have Delilah Workman, who I debated putting her parents up here too, but they're literally so insequential to the story. She, however, is kind of important within the first few episodes, and then something happens to her, and we're gonna get into that. She is not a part of the Guard, but she is a commoner and doesn't have the royal blood that the Primes do. Next, we have Xavier, who is one of the children of Gabriel. Now, he becomes a little bit more important in the middle of the season, but we do meet him in the first couple episodes. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that because there's some spoilers later on about his character. And finally, we have Killian, who is a doctor in Sanctum. So this episode takes place right after the last one left off. Clark, Bellamy, and Jordan wake up Murphy, Emori, Echo, Raven, and Abby, I believe, and they share Monty's message with that group. Oh, they also wake up Shaw because he's still kind of a part of their group of people. Immediately after this, though, in such a weird scene, Raven, right after finding out that her friend Monty is dead, goes and has sex with Shaw in like the first 5 minutes of this episode. We also see very awkwardly, Jordan hands Abby some algae from his father to save Kane, who at the end of the last episode was stabbed by Vincent and is in critical condition. It's here where Jordan and Bellamy kind of reveal to the group that they learned that Aegis 3 was a colonizing mission, and he tells them that the mothership went to 5 different planets and dropped mission teams on each one, and that planet Alpha just happened to be the closest to them. So a team of Jackson, Miller, Clark, Emori, Murphy, Bellamy, Echo, and Shaw decide to go on a mission on the new planet Alpha. Deja vu from the first episode when the prisoners are being sent down to the ground. These guys are all getting sent down to the ground yet again. Up on the ship, Jordan and Raven begin to lose communication with everybody on the dropship. They also see a really weird green aurora on the planet, so that's curious. And then we see the dropship land and everybody gets off, and thankfully they have breathable air. We also get the scene where Jordan is looking out the window and he notices that there is another planet right behind Alpha, which brings him to the conclusion that Alpha is not a planet. It is a moon of that planet that's like all purple. We see Nyla waking Octavia, who was purposefully left sleeping because of her whole villain arc last season. Clark and Bellamy's group decide to camp near a beautiful, gorgeous lake, and Murphy decides to go swimming in it, which they have absolutely no idea if it could be toxic or not. So at the campfire, everybody is giving Clark terrible looks, like she is still being completely judged for her actions 125 years ago. And then suddenly, a swarm of these fuck-ass bugs comes out of nowhere and forces them to leave their campsite. So they run into the woods, they make it to this compound, and Shaw runs right into like an energy shield thing that like electrocutes him. And because Clark has Nightblood, she runs in there and is unaffected by it, and she turns off the shield, which lets everybody run in to the compound. The shield then kills all the bugs that's around them. And then they bury Shaw. So one of the things that I dislike about The 100 is its willingness to kill characters off. And that could be a positive. It can also be a negative because they just did it way too often. Here with Shaw, what was the reason? I mean, I don't want to sit here and pretend to know anything that went on behind the scenes about this. I literally could not find anything. So my guess is that he didn't, like, the actor did not have anything else going on. I could be wrong, so correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but there's just no reason why they killed him. Like, it's kind of giving me Lexa and Lincoln flashbacks, not going to lie. I don't particularly have a very strong relationship to the character of Shaw. I mean, he was there for like 10 episodes maybe. It is sad that they keep fridging Raven's love interests, like Finn, the random ass guy from season 2, now here with Shaw. And it's kind of like, why are we doing that? And it's not even just Raven's love interests either. It's like, obviously Octavia's love interests have all bit the bullet at one point. Fridging characters for the sake of fridging characters does not make a good storyline, in my opinion. There always has to be a reason to kill a character, and I feel like Jason Rothenberg just kind of wanted to do whatever he wanted to do, and his mind just changed right on the fly. I feel like his attention span, honestly, is that of a fly, if I'm being honest with you. Every 5 seconds he sees a new storyline, and he's like, I gotta do that one, I gotta do that one, I gotta do that one, I gotta do that one. Back up on the ship, we see Abby confronting Raven for supposedly stealing Kane's medicine, because Raven thinks that Abby is going to relapse if she just has pills lying around. We then see Bellamy and Clark's group arrive in the compound, and they make their way around. Look, and it's a ghost town. There's nobody around.
no sight of human life anywhere. Abby is able to wake Kane up from his coma when Octavia walks in and is ready for a verbal fight with these two because of their actions during the dark year. She's kind of still blaming them for all of it.
Kane's condition just keeps getting worse. He starts coughing up blood because of Octavia and him getting in a fight. Not even a physical fight, literally just him standing up and he could not handle the verbiage that she was throwing at him. So he like fell down basically, and Abby's solution is to put him in cryo sleep because he's literally about to die and there's no other way to keep him alive because they don't have any more algae. A quick note on the whole Kane thing, he will not be in the majority of this season as a main character. I'm just going to spoil it for you now. He does not show up again until way later on. I'm not entirely sure why they decided to completely write him off without actually writing him off. Like, he's always just kind of in the back for this season. They could have just killed him off, to be honest with you. And then when you find out what they end up doing to him later, it's like kind of a punch in the face a little bit to the character.
Back on the ground, Murphy finds an iPod and starts listening to an assorted playlist of random ass music. He asks Amori to dance, who is very irritated by him suddenly. Like, her mood switches very quickly.
After the group arrive in Sanctum, they find this shrine with this picture of these three girlies on it, and they learn that Eligius III sent families down to planet Alpha, and that's who colonized the planet.
Bellamy shows Clark a picture book, like a kid's picture book, and they read it. And it says that when the sun's eclipse on this moon, it's gonna drive the humans, the bugs, everybody crazy. And then, out of nowhere, Amori runs to John and stabs him, and they have to like detain her. Oh, also, then they see somebody has taken off with their dropship out in the distance. And that is where episode 1 ends.
So we learn here that Amori is going a little bit crazy because of the eclipse that's happening. It's kind of funny because there is supposed to be an eclipse in real life, like later on in April, and there's literally people on TikTok, this is so unrelated, there's literally people on TikTok acting like it's going to be the end of the world, and it's like, are we cavemen? There's a storyline about this in The 100. Like, what? I don't get it. Anyway, in this fictional eclipse, it basically drives the plants to give off some kind of toxin that when you breathe it, it like drives you crazy and makes you want to kill everyone around you, like even if you're friends with them. So that's why Amori was trying to stab John. As for the timeline of season 6, episode 1, it primarily takes place on April 26th and 27th of 2281. Episode 2 offers a flashback to the colonizing mission. We learn that there was 4 families that Eligius III sent down to Alpha, one of them being the Lightborn family. We learn that there was a father named Russell, a mother named Simone, and then a daughter named Josephine. Josephine is very flirtatious with one of the other colonizers named Gabriel, and we will learn a lot about those two later on. Russell Lightborn, who is the father of Josephine, kills Josephine and his wife during the first eclipse.
So Bellamy and Clark's group decide to split up and handcuff themselves to different like furnitures across the room from each other so that they don't attack each other, because this eclipse is going to drive them mad and they're going to want to kill each other very, very soon. Back on the mothership, we see that Eligius is invaded by some of the local Sanctumites, mainly the Lee family. So this woman and her family, Kaylee and her family, invade the Eligius ship. They gas everyone on the ship and lock them in a specific room. The only one that they weren't able to catch is Raven, who wakes Diyoza up for help. Meanwhile, back on the ground, things are not looking good for Miller and Jackson. They both share a psychosis together and believe that there's something in Miller's arm. So Clark and Bellamy free themselves and go try to help Miller and Jackson. We then see Amori taunt Echo, who uses like a tranquilizer on herself to knock herself out so she doesn't have to experience this. Everybody at this point is seeing visions, people from their past. Clark begins to hear her own mother's voice in her head telling her that she's not good enough and that everybody hates her and that she should just kill herself. Back up on the ship, we see Raven and Diyoza use Maddie to crawl through the air duct to get to Kaylee and the others. They leave one of the Lees alive, that being Kaylee, and as she holds a family member in her arm, the family member is like, don't forget about their bodies. Like, don't forget to grab their bodies. We'll figure out what that means later. We then see Bellamy go all ballistic on Murphy. He attacks him, they get into a huge fist fight. Clark is trying to stop these two from fighting each other, and she eventually grabs like some gas and uses it to knock all 3 of them out. Meanwhile, the hostages are freed by Diyoza, Maddie, and Raven. We see Gaia, Maddie, Raven, Jordan, Abby, Diyoza, and Octavia arrive on the planet. Kaylee leads them to their compound where she suspects that they will be, and Raven sees Shaw's grave. We then see Abby's group arrive in Sanctum, and they reunite with Clark and Bellamy's group, who are all knocked out and all just recovering from the eclipse. Meanwhile, Murphy is not looking too good. He has been poisoned. There's like black shit in his veins. And then the Sanctumites return home, and a little girl asks Clark, "Are you here to take us home?" And that is just never explained, by the way.
So the timeline of episode 2, it all takes place on April 27th, 2281, and then the flashback takes place in 2045. I have absolutely no idea when this happens as far as the day and the month, but they do give us 2045 as the year.
So episode 3 opens where episode 2 left off. We see Russell Prime arrive, and he actually saves Murphy with the help of Killian, who is their doctor. They use this like weird snake looking thing to somehow suck all the poison out of him.
So we learn here that the Sanctumites and the Primes essentially detest somebody who's named Gabriel, and they call him the Demon Gabriel, and it's not made clear to us about why he's called the Demon Gabriel here in Sanctum. We learn that Gabriel, the guy from the flashback that Josephine was all flirty with, no longer resides in Sanctum. In fact, Russell absolutely hates him.
He then gives the order to lock all of the Allegis/One Crew girlies up.
So all the girlies are in the tavern, and Delilah comes up to them, and she is obviously one of the Sanctumites, and basically just information dumps on us, everything we need to know about the lore of Sanctum. She tells them about the Primes and how their bloodline essentially rules all of Sanctum and has over like 200 years. We learn that they name food after them, they name drinks after them, make songs after them, so it's basically like a god-like figure, and we already know that Russell is one of those Primes.
Back at the dropship, we see Maddie telling Gaia about a dark force in her mind that she can't quite pinpoint who it is and why he's there. And Gaia tells her that it is Shade Haida. Now, Shade Haida is the Dark Commander, if you don't know. Trig, that's who this is. And we'll get glimpses of him later on in the season. And as they're talking, Diyoza is sitting there, still very pregnant, and she's very sassy. That's my mother right there. Then they are attacked by a group of the Children of Gabriel, otherwise known as Cogs. They are like the grounder type characters this season. Meanwhile, back in Sanctum, Russell invites Clark to dinner. We then see Bellamy, Octavia, Raven, and Echo follow Kaylee through the woods so that she can retrieve her family's bodies back on the Allegis ship. Back in Sanctum, we see Murphy waking up, and he says he thinks that he's going to hell because remember, he died momentarily and he thinks he went to hell.
We see here that Delilah is meditating, and Jordan learns that, by the way, Jordan is like flirting hardcore with her, and she tells him that she is about to become one of the Primes the next day, and that she will be Priya the 7th. And honestly, this kind of baffles the audience if you're not like aware of what's going on. Her parents own a tavern. Like, she's not treated like royalty, so why is she all of a sudden going to be put on a pedestal? Like,
as Bellamy's group arrives to the ship, it scares Kaylee away because she sees the Children of Gabriel at the ship, obviously attacking Diyoza, Maddie, and Gaia. So Kaylee leaves when she sees the Children of Gabriel, but Bellamy's group with Octavia decide to go in and attack, specifically Octavia. Back at the palace, Clark is in a beautiful dress, and she goes to dinner with Russell, who claims to know everything about her. It's revealed that Jordan told Delilah about all his favorite Clark stories growing up, including the ones where she committed genocide. And this obviously scares Russell and Simone because they don't want genocidal murderers in their lovely compound. We then see Octavia kill a bunch of the Children of Gabriel, and Bellamy banishes Octavia from the ship. So she's left alone to die in the woods by her own brother. Then we see Jordan kiss Delilah, and before they can do anything more, they are attacked by a group of Children of Gabriel. I'm sensing a theme here. Delilah is taken by the Children of Gabriel because she is the next in line to become a Prime, and the Children of Gabriel are just so against the Primes. We then see Clark chase down the guy that has Delilah, and she saves Delilah, but she's unable to save a little girl named Rose, who also the next in line after Delilah. Because Clark saved Delilah and tried to save Rose, Russell decides to let her and her people stay, which is a big win. We then see Bellamy's team return to Sanctum, obviously minus Octavia. And when Russell agrees to let them stay, he says absolutely not to Diyoza because Russell says that her name is in the history books next to Bin Laden and a doll. Yeah, so she is on the wrong side of history here, and so he banishes her. So she goes out into the woods, and we'll see where her story picks back up in the next episode.
So this episode takes place on April 27th and 28th of 2281.
We see Jade come out and find Diyoza in the woods. She tasks her with finding Rose.
So in this episode, we learn that it is Delilah's naming day. Now, naming day is essentially when you reach a certain age, you are then allowed to become one with the primes. And it's kind of confusing, but I will explain the whole ceremony when we get to it.
We then see Russell and Simone consider canceling naming day because of the fact that they lost Rose just the day prior, and they don't want people to be upset about them continuing on with Delilah's naming day. We then see Clark meet Killian, who is the doctor, and she begins flirting with him, sort of. It's a little awkward. We then see Russell publicly apologize to Kaylee for not keeping her people safe during the Red Sun, which is a little questionable because they chose to run off and get on the Alegis ship. We then see Octavia has been found by the children of Gabriel along with the little girl named Rose. For Clark's naming day apology tour, she goes and apologizes to Bellamy first. He immediately accepts it and gives her a big warm hug, and it's all hunky-dory. We see Raven meeting Riker, who is one of the primes, although I don't think she knows that, or at least knows the extent of what that even means. We then see Clark attend a party. She's at a rave, babes. And she's dancing with Killian. Meanwhile, back in the woods, we see Diyoza arrive to save Octavia and Rose. However, Rose is shot by one of the children of Gabriel and she dies. Jade is with them, so she takes Rose's body and then assigns her another task, the task of killing the old man Gabriel, who the cogs don't even know if he's alive or dead, but she does it and she partners up with Octavia. We then see Clark have sex with Killian, who reveals himself to be working with the children of Gabriel, so there's that. The reason why he's doing this and the reason why he knocks her out is because she has Nightblood. Nightblood is important on the moon because every one of the primes has Nightblood, so he doesn't want them to make Clark into a prime. We then see Delilah's naming day ceremony. She is taken into a private room, and then minutes later, she walks out.
So after Delilah is escorted to that private room, she comes out like a completely new woman. She is Priya now, and she does not recognize Jordan.
So this is Priya. Now, I know you can't really see that well, but I'll put the picture up. She is in the body of Delilah, and I would have put her closer, but it's fine. You just need to know, this is Delilah. She is now dead. So yeah, she is now in Delilah's body, who is now technically dead. Another thing to mention, she is Riker's mom. She looks the same age as him, so.
At the end of the episode, Killian is found by the Sanctumite guards. Now that he's revealed to be working with the children of Gabriel, he decides to kill himself, and the Sanctumite guards bring Clark's body to Russell and Simone. So the primes decide that they have an opportunity here that they need to seize. They are going to use Clark's body, because she's Nightblood, to put Josephine, their daughter, in Clark. The primes are body snatchers.
More hosts. It was 14 years between Rose and Delilah. 14 years. We can get her back tonight. All we have to do is kill this innocent girl.
And it's revealed here that Becca basically did the tech for Alegis 3 and gave everybody on board a mind drive, which is similar to the Flame, but it's not an AI. It's essentially just like drive that holds the memories and emotions and feelings of a certain person, which is what they've been doing for 200 years. So the entirety of this episode takes place on April 29th, 2281.
So, because Clark dies at the end of last episode, she now has a cross on her, and if I accidentally point to her, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about Josephine, okay? Get it? Because Josephine is in Clark's body. We see Jade return with Kaylee's family's mind drives, and Josephine reveals to her father, Russell, that Kaylee is the one that killed her in her last body. So in return, she decides to kill Kaylee herself, and Kaylee dies, or at least her body dies. We then see Josephine painting her own face from her first body, which is just the most narcissistic thing you could probably think of. Now, she is a little bit of a narcissist, let me just tell you. You probably wouldn't have been able to gather that from her first like that first flashback from episode 2. But no, she's very much a narcissistic person, kind of sociopathic too. We'll get to see that. We'll get to see that, don't worry.
So it's here in this episode where we see Josephine is in Clark's body and she's pretending to be Clark to try and get as much information on one crew as she can and to see who in their group is a Nightblood so that she can make them hosts, essentially.
And she tells Maddie that she's allowed to go to school, even though like days before she told Maddie that she wasn't allowed to go to school, or at least Clark told Maddie she wasn't allowed to go to school. This baffles everyone, including Gaia, who is on board with the not going to school part. She's like, Clark, you wouldn't normally be okay with this. Gaia then decides to speak in Trig to her, and she's like, I don't know what you're saying, and she's like trying to play it off. Meanwhile, in the woods, while Octavia and Dioza are looking for the old man, they chase down Xavier. He stops them and they end up stopping in quicksand. We see Josephine talking to Abby, obviously as Clark, about a way to save Kane. All this is just a ploy to try and figure out who is a Nightblood and who is not a Nightblood. Murphy, Bellamy, Jordan, and Gaia, they go into a secret room in the palace and find rows and rows of skeletons in a secret room, which can only be the other bodies that the Primes have been using for decades and decades and decades. Josephine as Clark then arrives and tries to convince them to leave. They walk through another secret passageway and make it into like a medical office, hospital room area, and they watch these like really old logs.
So as Jordan and the rest of the girlies are watching the logs left by Russell and Gabriel, they find out that Russell and Gabriel spent like 30 years trying to perfect the mind wipe, is what they call it. It's essentially just killing the mind without killing the body and then putting the mind drive of said Prime in someone's head and having them resurrect in that body, essentially. They officially get it with Josephine II in 2070.
Josephine then finds out through Gaia that Maddie is a Nightblood, which is another potential host for the Primes. Meanwhile, in the quicksand, Octavia and Dioza decide to give up their gun so that Xavier will pull them out and they can chat like adults. Everyone's at this meeting with Bellamy, including Josephine, Murphy, Gaia, Amori, and Echo, and they're talking about what they should do about this whole like body snatcher situation. Gaia is no longer defending these people. She's no longer defending their faith. She's very much like, yeah, that's wrong, babes. That's wrong. But Josephine, she's saying that she doesn't see anything wrong with it. Obviously, everybody still thinks it's Clark. They're all like, Clark, what the fuck? Like, you would be totally against this normally. Bellamy then lets it slip that Clark is not a real Nightblood and that she was synthetically turned into a Nightblood back in season 4 in a lab. And this excites the fuck out of Josephine. She's like, we can make it? Like, we can just make hosts. We can literally just make as many as we want. So the psychopath that she is, this now changes her whole plan. She's like, we need to learn how to make Nightblood now. Like, let's get on that. Josephine storms out of there and Bellamy follows her out, and he's a little bit suspicious. He's just a little bit suspicious about this whole situation, as he should be. He begins speaking Trig to her, and she is still doesn't know what he's saying, but she kind of figures it out because she's a little bit of a genius, and she's like, it kind of sounds like you're saying flashback. So does that mean dream? Then right then and there, the horror on his face when he realizes that his best friend is supposedly dead and some entitled ass god took her life from her. So she knocks Bellamy out and locks him up so that he doesn't tell anybody else.
As Octavia and Dioza make their way out of the quicksand, there is this like green flash that comes over them, and Gabriel tells them to run. And Dioza is able to make it out of the quicksand, but Octavia is not, and she ends up getting stuck in the quicksand, and she's like, well, this is probably going to kill me. So she goes under the quicksand, like completely under it, except I think her arm is like out of it somehow. And this flare essentially speeds up the aging process of all the trees, and all the trees die. And when she comes up out of the quicksand and Dioza helps dig Octavia out, her arm is like that of an old lady's. Like, her arm aged like 50 years at that point.
And at the end of the episode, we see Josephine confronting Murphy, basically telling him the whole situation. She is not Clark, she is Josephine. Looks like he's about to get up and tell somebody, but then she offers him immortality for himself. Now, how this is going to happen, her plan is to wipe the Lee's mind drives because she doesn't care about the Lees anymore, and she thinks that this might be the only way to get Murphy to help her play Clark a little bit better until she can make Nightblood herself.
So this episode takes place all on April 30th, 2281, with the flashback taking place in 2070.
So overnight, Murphy has been coaching Josephine on Clark lore. The plan is to have Murphy pretend to be the Sanctumites' prisoner in order to get Bellamy to agree to a deal to let him go free, I guess, in order to help them make Nightblood. Meanwhile, in the woods, we see Xavier offering to help Octavia and Diyoza. Obviously, in the last episode, Octavia had to undergo some kind of experience with that temporal flare thingy. We get a side plot this episode where Echo finds out that the disloyal Sanctumites get thrown to the trees and the trees literally eat them. In this episode, we also see Raven confront Riker because she finds out that he is one of the primes.
We get a scene in this episode where Maddie meets Shadehaida for the first time in her little mind palace, and she's obviously very scared of him. Like, he is creepy. I don't know if he really belongs in the show, if I'm being honest with you. I don't really like any scene that he's in. The actor's not particularly good. They deepen his voice like 10 octaves. And for what? Like, to make him sound scarier? Girl, it's kind of hokey. Anyway, he wants to turn Maddie evil.
Josie convinces Abby to make Kane into a Nightblood. Really, Josie just wants Abby to show her how to make Nightblood, and she doesn't really give a shit if Kane lives or dies. We then see Russell and Josephine erase Kaylee and her family's mind drives so that she can give them to Murphy and Emori. We see Jade follows Echo into the woods. She tries to prevent her from killing the guy who's getting eaten by the tree. Echo knocks her out and places her in the tree. We then see Josephine come to Bellamy, and he's still not very keen on making a deal with these people. However, then Russell arrives, has to clean up Josephine's mess essentially, and when he tries to let Bellamy go free, he escapes and beats Russell up, or at least tries to beat Russell up, but then he decides to be civil so that they can help him build One Crew's compound, convinced that the anomaly, that like green swirly cloud thingy, is calling out to Octavia, himself, and Diyoza, so they all head out for the anomaly. Bellamy breaks the news to everybody basically except Abby that Clark is indeed dead. This includes Maddie. At the end of the episode, Josie goes to sleep, and all of a sudden, we flash into Clark's mind. So Clark is not dead, babes. She's still alive, and she is in her little mind palace. The entirety of next episode is essentially about her inside of her mind going at it with Miss Josephine. And we're gonna see what that means.
So the entirety of this episode takes place on May 1st, 2281. So this entire episode takes place in Clark's mind because Russell obviously failed to wipe Clark's mind. Somehow she's still there. During the mind wipe process that they failed to remove the neural mesh in Clark's head that is left over from the chip all the way back from season 3. Who here remembers when we were still dealing with an AI that ended the world back in season 3? If you remember all the way back in season 3 when they EMP'd Raven to get the chip out of her, there was like a neural mesh weird thing. They never really explain what it is. It's like the remnant of the chip essentially that comes out of her neck. Clark did not have that procedure done. She did not have the EMP done. It was literally just Raven and Abby. Her mind was able to cling to the neural mesh, and Clark tries to hide the memory of Raven's EMP situation so that Josephine cannot find it. And we also get cameos from Octavia as Blood Reyna from season 5, and then also randomly Maya from season 2. Basically, all the figments of Clark's imagination are trying to, first of all, they're judging her, but then Clark realizes that she can kind of just create whatever she wants. She gets all of them to participate in hiding the memory from Josie. And after a long chase, Josephine finally gets her hand on the memory because Clark's like, well, I might as well give up now. So Clark gives up, and she gives the little memory to it's kind of stupid, but she gives this little memory to Josephine of Raven getting EMP'd, which allows Josephine to know how to purge Clark's mind from her body. We then see a cameo from Monty in this season, and he basically tells her to get up and keep fighting Josephine. She goes to Josephine's area of the mind space because there's two separate like sides of the brain, I guess, and each person is residing in a different place. So Clark goes to Josephine's side of the brain, and she sees the memory of Kaylee Prime poisoning Josephine because Josephine killed Isaac, who is Josephine's null boyfriend. Now, if you don't know what a null is, it's basically just somebody who cannot be a Nightblood, like will not produce a Nightblood and is not a Nightblood themselves. And Josephine was very much for oblation, which essentially is like eugenics, basically. Like, she did not want any more red bloods to be like birthed. That is why Josephine killed Isaac, because Kaylee was in love with a null, and he was just soiling the bloodline, in Josephine's opinion. We also see a flashback to, I believe it's 2043, and Josephine is out to lunch with her friend, and this guy comes walking in and basically kills himself right in front of her because she rejects him. Yeah, so Clark sees that memory. Josephine yells at Clark and then wakes herself up in the middle of the night. Clark is left in the mind space, and Josephine is back in her own body.
And at the end of the episode, Bellamy is negotiating for peace with Russell so that he can help them build their compound.
So Clark and Monty are still in this diner. Obviously, Monty's not really there. It's just a figment of her imagination. And he realizes that they can use the Christmas lights in the diner as a way to tap out Morse code.
When Josie, aka Clark, is tapping Morse code on her shoulder, Bellamy shows Miller what she was tapping out because he was writing it down in his little notebook, and it says alive. So now Bellamy has a reason to go against these people because their end of the bargain can be rectified.
So the majority of this episode takes place on May 1st, 2281 in the night. So that means it'll also probably bleed over to May 2nd in the morning. The flashback where Josephine kills Isaac takes place in 2275. And then the flashback with the guy killing himself happens in 2043.
Octavia and Dioza arrive at the so-called Verge, which is essentially just the closest you can get to the anomaly without losing your mind, because the anomaly has a very similar side effect as the red sun toxin. So we see Octavia is beginning to lose her memories because of the temporal flare.
So Dioza figures out that Xavier, the guy that they've been traveling with to go find the old man, is in fact the old man, because she sees the scar on his neck and she's like, that is a prime right there.
In this episode, we are also introduced to Gavin, who is a null, who is offered up essentially to be Kane's replacement. Because if you remember in the last episode, the Primes are helping Abby save Kane in return for her making Nightblood for them. And their solution to save Kane is essentially make him into a Nightblood so that they can put the mind drive in his mind, download his mind, and then put the mind drive in someone else. So this is the second body that is being prepped for Kane. We see Maddie is growing increasingly upset with the Primes since Clark is dead, so she, in this episode, tries to kill a couple of them. In this episode, we also see Murphy proposes to Emori, and he uses the mind drives in place of a ring. And she's like, together they work with Josephine, who is obviously still in Clark's body, in order to create an EMP, which would essentially purge Clark from her own body.
We learn here from Gabriel that he was very much against continuing on in another body. He wanted to die in his last body. I think it was like Gabriel 5 or 6 or something. His friend Eduardo, who's one of the children of Gabriel, who was like helping him lead the revolution against the Primes, did not want to see him die. So he used his mind drive, found Xavier, who is the Nightblood that he's currently in, mind wiped Xavier somehow. I don't know how he figured out how to do it. Put Gabriel's mind drive in Xavier, and that is how he was resurrected. Oh, we also learn here that Gabriel killed Eduardo as soon as he woke up in the new body. But none of the cogs know that Gabriel is alive. They all think Xavier is still Xavier. Like, they don't know that he is a prime.
We see Emori go to Bellamy for one of the Allegis shot callers so that she and Josephine can reverse engineer it into an EMP. And before she leaves, she doesn't have the stomach to lie to Bellamy. So she tells Bellamy that she and Murphy are working with Josephine and gives him a heads up about when this whole thing is happening. Oh yeah, we also see Maddie kill one of the primes named Miranda, who is just such a flop. She does not do a single thing for the plot, so I haven't included her, but she is one of the primes. And just as Josephine, Murphy, and Emori finish the EMP, Emori runs off with the EMP into edge of the force field. Josie and Murphy meet her out there before Bellamy and Echo meet them out there. Bellamy then stops Josephine from killing Emori and Murphy, and he ties Josephine up and takes her into the woods so that he can find Gabriel to get Josephine's mind drive out of Clark and save Clark's body. Oh yeah, we also see that Maddie tries to stab Priya, but ends up missing and hitting Jordan, who steps in the way because he's still in love with Delilah's body. Obviously, Delilah is dead.
So as Diyoza, Gabriel, and Octavia make their way to the anomaly, they start kind of losing their minds a little bit because the anomaly has a very similar effect as the red sun toxin. It just kind of makes you more sad, I've noticed, with the characters and less angry and aggressive. It leads you to see visions of people from your past, people from your future. For example, Diyoza sees her future daughter, Hope. Hope basically tells Diyoza to follow her into the anomaly. And Diyoza is like, I don't know what's out there, but I just know I have to go find it. So Diyoza runs into the anomaly and Octavia follows her to go get her.
Diyoza, wait!
Moments later, we see Octavia return from the anomaly. Her hair is completely cleaned, her injuries have been healed, and Diyoza does not return. So we're kind of left in the dark for a while, but we will learn what happened while she was in the anomaly and everything that went on there.
So Gavin dies and Kane's mind drive is put into Gavin. Yeah, this can be kind of confusing because this body is technically not dead, but this body is dead. But this is still his mind, so I'm keeping him without a cross and putting the cross on him because the character of Gavin is dead. And this allows Abby to give the Nightblood serum to Simone so that they can make whoever they want into a Nightblood.
So the entirety of this episode takes place May 2nd, 2281. At the beginning of this episode, we see Gabriel give Octavia some concentrated red sun toxin that will hopefully reveal to them what happened to her while she was in the anomaly. However, that's not what happened. She ends up like having a dream basically of her in the fighting pit at the Second Dawn bunker back on Earth, and she confronts Pike, and she basically forces herself to face her demons. Pike being there, and then she also gets in a duel with her former Blood Reyna self back from the bunker.
We see that Josephine and Clark's mind is beginning to collapse. She begins having a seizure, and Bellamy gets her up and tries to walk further into the woods. However, the children of Gabriel arrive, and none of them are pictured because they're not important, but they arrive and kidnap these two. Well, technically they kidnap these two, but it is still Clark's body. And then for the first time this whole season, we see Indra is finally awoken by Kane, well, technically Kane and Raven. She works together with Kane and Raven to try and float the serum out of the ship so that nobody else can get turned into a Nightblood. So Kane is still very much against this resurrection shit. He does not think that Abby made the right decision, so that's why he's trying to stop the Primes from continuing this. So the Cogs have taken Bellamy and Josephine, as I said earlier, and they are about to kill Josephine because she has the Nightblood on her. So they know that she is a Prime now, so they're about to execute Josephine when she gives control over to Clark. So now Clark is in the driver's seat and she fights her way out because she's a little bit of a badass. Clark then leaves Bellamy, who can survive because he's not a Nightblood, so they're not going to kill him. But then Jade binds her, so she knocks her out. At the end of the episode, we see Kane decide to float not only the Nightblood serum, but also himself. Oh, and Abby gets to say goodbye to him.
And with that, Kane does die. And it's, I mean, like I said earlier, it just feels like kind of a waste of time. And like, why didn't they just kill him first episode of season 6? Like, if they didn't know if he could fully return in season 6, it just feels a little odd to me to stretch his death out over an entire season. Like, it kind of just feels wrong and feels like a disservice to his character, especially when the last 2 episodes that you end up seeing this character in, it's not even the actual actor that portrays him. It's some random guy that they put his mind into. I'm really glad that they did not have Kane 2 stick around. I think that would have just been a complete disservice to the character. I think this was kind of the right way to go once they had already kind of made their bed. So overall, I think it does make sense that they kill him here. Again, why did they need to stretch it out? They could have just killed him in episode 1 and I would have been more okay with that. Side note, they made his resurrected body so extremely hot and just a little too young to be Kane. Do you know what I mean? Like, it felt a little weird. So the entirety of this episode takes place on May 3rd, 2281.
So the wall between Clark and Josephine's minds is slowly disappearing. So now Josephine can literally just talk to Clark, like while Clark is still awake. Before they weren't able to do that. She finds a little lookout, like hideout area. So she goes underground in there and then has a seizure. So our girl's not doing too well. We see Simone and Abby and the others return from space, and then Russell decides to arrest Abby and Raven with the others. This is when Simone tells Abby that her daughter is dead, and Abby still has had absolutely no idea that Clark was body snatched. So the Lightborns plan on executing one member of one crew because their daughter was taken into the woods and they have absolutely no idea if she's still alive. So we see Riker is forced by Gaia and Echo to work with them in order to stop the execution. While they're all locked up, Murphy basically tells Abby that it was his fault, like it's his fault that Clark is dead. Meanwhile, in the mind space, because Clark and Josephine's mind is like deteriorating, Clark decides to get rid of as many memories of Josephine's as possible in order to make space, because it's getting very overcrowded in there. Because Riker has told the truth to a majority of the Sanctomites, one of them walks in on them having dinner, that being the Primes, and he kills Simone. And then he is basically arrested. We then see Gabriel and Octavia find Clark, who is not in good shape in her little lookout area. She's being eaten alive by the tree roots. However, this isn't really Clark. Josephine is back in control, and Octavia's like, who the fuck are you? And then some of the Sanctomites, including Jade, arrive, the guard, they all arrive and try to kidnap Josephine back. Bellamy, who just so happens to be one of the guards, arrives to kidnap Josephine. Back in Sanctum, all of one crew are tied up, minus Echo and Gaia. Russell has now ordered all of them to die since Simone has been killed. He sees it as their fault, so he orders all of one crew to die. But Abby and Murphy are able to negotiate for 24 hours in order to make them more Nightblood. So Russell gives them that time. They are all taken off the stakes. Also, I haven't put a cross on her yet because she's still in her mind drive. But just know that this body is dead.
Gabriel kills Josephine. However, when he's removing her mind drive, her consciousness clings onto that neural mesh that's in Clark's head. And Josephine's about to kill Clark in Clark's mind space. Clark would be completely dead at that point. Like, there would be no resurrecting Clark. But Clark ends up killing Josephine first. So Josephine's consciousness completely obliterated. So now Clark is officially resurrected in her own body.
And with that, Josephine's code has been fully erased by Gabriel. So therefore, her mind is gone. There's no resurrecting her at this point. So I've put a cross on her for good.
So the entirety of this episode takes place on May 3rd, 2281.
At the beginning of the episode, we see that Abby and Jackson are draining Maddie's bone marrow in order to make more Nightblood for the Sanctomite girlies. I think I forgot to mention, but in the last episode, Riker ended up betraying Echo and knocking her out and locking her up. So she has been detained. Russell basically tells Echo that she is going to be Simone's next host. So that's horrifying. A group of cogs that are still alive find out that Xavier is indeed not Xavier and that he is the old man Gabriel. And this goes against everything that they believe in because they are not for the Primes and they still see Gabriel as a Prime. The only reason that they were following him before is because he was against it as well. And he said that that last body would have been his final body. So the cogs turn on Gabriel. We then see Echo is made into a Nightblood blood, which tells them that the bone marrow they are harvesting from Maddie works.
So in this episode, we get a flashback focused on Echo. It's a very short flashback that's kind of like nudged here in the middle of the episode. Back in Echo's past as a kid, I believe this takes place at some point in the 2120s. We learn that Echo's real name is not Echo, and that while she was being selected by Queen Naya, her best friend Echo, because Echo's real name is Ash, and Echo, the real one, was asked by Naya to kill Ash, and she couldn't do it. So Ash kills Echo and takes Echo's name. Yeah, it's kind of a useless flashback if I'm being honest with you, but it was still good to see Queen Naya again. Like, I'm so sorry, she mothers so severely every time she's on screen, and I'm not going to lie about that. Like, that is a diva right there.
We then see Miller and Gaia arrive to save Echo, who immediately gets up and kills Riker.
We learn here that the Cogs, along with Clark, Bellamy, and Octavia, come up with a plan to use a smoke bomb, essentially, with the red sun toxin in it. They decide that they're going to put it in the water to basically cause chaos so that the Cogs can storm in, while everyone thinks that it is a red sun eclipse.
Jade and the other Sanctumite guards arrive with Murphy to Gabriel's camp in order to rescue Josephine, who is obviously Clark pretending to be Josephine. And so now not only do we have in this season Eliza Taylor playing Clark, we also have Eliza Taylor playing Josephine, we also have Eliza Taylor playing Josephine pretending to be Clark, and we also have Eliza Taylor playing Clark pretending to be Josephine. What a range.
So the entirety of this episode takes place on May 4th, 2281.
Clark has Josephine's mind drive taken out by Russell. Obviously, everyone in Sanctum still believes that Clark is Josephine. She's going undercover so that she can take the shield down for the children of Gabriel to march in and kill the rest of the primes. Oh my gosh. Then we see Murphy and Amori walk out, and they are now primes. They have Daniel and Kaylee's mind drives in their heads. Obviously, they are not Daniel and Kaylee because those ones were wiped. We then see Clark arrive to Abby and Maddie in the lab area, and she tells them that she is Clark and that she's not Josephine. Abby is obviously very happy about this, so she hugs Clark. Clark then reunites with Echo, Gaia, and Miller and the others and tells them the plan. We then see Gabriel invade Sanctum. He has left Octavia and Bellamy at the tree line, and he gets into Sanctum and releases the bomb to cause the false alarm.
Abby decides that she is going to be the donor for the bone marrow and that using Maddie continuously is unethical, so she turns herself into a Nightblood before using her own bone marrow to give Russell the needed doses to make the next set of primes. And Russell gets mad at Abby for doing this, so his solution is to use her as Simone's next body. And then out of nowhere, Russell kills Abby. And again, this is one of the questionable decisions that the show just randomly makes, killing a random character. Again, Abby was not necessarily needed to the plot, like she's just kind of been there for a few seasons, but I like Abby. Like, I'm not going to lie and say that I don't like her. I don't know any of the behind the scenes. I don't know if she asked to be killed off. I don't know if she had other endeavors that she wanted to pursue.
We then see Gabriel confront Russell before being arrested. Clark has Priya take down the radiation shield, which the Cogs then storm into Sanctum. Bellamy then uses Priya to tell everyone in Sanctum the truth that the primes are not gods. Priya then confirms this, obviously with a knife to her throat.
So we see here that Russell uses his own version of the toxin to, quote, purify non-believers, and having the believers kill the non-believers and like forcing them into submission and into believing in the divinity of the primes apparently is a technique that they've been using for centuries at this point.
We then see Delilah's parents kill Priya. So Priya is dead. This was obviously out of a fit of rage after hearing that their daughter is actually dead and she's not one with Priya. So yeah, Priya dies. And then Simone walks out, obviously wearing Abby's body, and Clark has to pretend that she's Josephine in this moment. She's just now finding out that her mom is dead. We then see the primes, including Russell, Simone, and Clark, board the Aegis ship, and that is where the penultimate episode of season 6 ends.
So this episode takes place all on May 5th, 2281.
At the beginning of the episode, Indra and the rest of One Crew are on the ship waiting for Clark and the other primes to arrive, and they are kind of in a showdown situation. One crew then stands down because Clark has a gun to Gaia's head.
The primes are planning on leaving Sanctum and abandoning all their people and taking the Aegis 4 ship to planet Beta because that is the closest new planet.
Because Maddie is acting irate because of Shadehaida in her mind, Raven tries to erase the Flames code. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, Clark has gotten her hands on the serum. She tries to float it out of the Aegis ship. However, these two arrive and confront her, and she's like, yeah, I'm not your daughter. Before they can try and kill her, Clark tries to kill them, but then Simone says that she's not really Simone. She's Abby, and she's pretending like Clark is. And Clark's like, what was my father's name? And she's unable to answer it. So Clark pulls the lever, her annual lever pull, floats Simone and the other primes that are still alive, effectively killing all of them, with the only people who are actually living with mind drives at this moment being Russell, Murphy, and Emori. Obviously, Murphy and Emori are not actually primes. They are just pretending to be Daniel and Kaylee. We see Bellamy, Octavia, and Gabriel, and they are able to successfully overcome the Red Sun, and they stop the Sanctumites from going all ballistic on them. Clark then gets Maddie to wake up and snap out of the spell that she's under from Shadehaida, and she orders that Russell is arrested, and then the flame is finally removed from Maddie, and Raven deletes the code off of the flame, effectively killing all of the commander's memories. However, Shadehaida doesn't die. He uploads himself to the ship. The flame was plugged into the ship, so he uploads himself to the ship. And next season, there is a fuck-ass explanation for this and a fuck-ass outcome of this that I'll explain later in the video. But just know, Shadehaida's not really dead, unfortunately. Bellamy's group saves the rest of the non-believers.
Towards the end of the episode, Gabriel notices Octavia has a random tattoo on her back that like nobody's ever seen before, and they realize it must have been given to her during her time in the anomaly.
We then see Clark's group return from space, and they all reunite with everybody in Sanctum. They did it without genocide. They won the war without genocide, but there is still way more to come in season 7.
A group of Octavia, Echo, Gabriel, and Bellamy head out to Gabriel's lookout point, his camp out in the woods, and he takes them underground to this stone that has a bunch of different symbols on it. It looks like that, by the way, and it essentially is tied to the anomaly, like controls the anomaly, question mark? We don't know yet. But he uses the red symbols on her back and taps them into the anomaly, essentially a code, and it opens the anomaly, like it opens up, and who walks through? Why, none other than the adult Hope Dioza. Everybody gagged. I was not expecting this necessarily. I thought it was going to be Dioza, to be honest with you. But no, a grown-up Hope walks in and she's like, Octavia! And Octavia like literally knows who she is. There's just no question in her mind that's who that is. We see them hug before Hope takes a knife and stabs Octavia. And then Octavia disappears, and then the anomaly closes. And that is the end of season 6. So the majority of this episode takes place on May 5th, 2281, and then the final few scenes take place on May 6th, 2281.
So this is the state of the board as of season 6. There's one more season to go, babes. One more. I don't know how I'm gonna fit the rest of the characters. I think I might just huddle them over there.
So season 6 is not the best season in my opinion. I feel like I really love the mythology and the world building that they do here with the Planet Alpha and the anomaly, but the first few episodes, they kind of are just dilly-dallying a little bit. And like I said before, I feel like if they actually had like a full season of like 16 or 20 episodes, maybe not 20 episodes, but like 16 episodes, they would have fully been able to dive deeper into the story and the dreaded final season. I have actually made a video on this season on my channel like 3 years ago, but I privated it. I really tore this season to shreds, and I think a lot of people despise this season for a lot of different reasons. There is just so many storylines, like too many to fit into this season. It's very bloated. The season is slow and bloated at the same time. I don't know how they were able to do that, but they were. With all that to say, it is also very tense, and that is an aspect of the season that I like. The buildup of season 6 took episodes and episodes and episodes, whereas the build up in this season doesn't take as long. So without further ado, let me take you to the board.
So season 7 introduces us to quite a few new characters. First, we have Hope, who is Diosa's daughter. I kind of already mentioned that at the end of season 6. The reason why I didn't outline her in this purple color, which was season 6's color, is because she's not really important until season 7, so that's why I've outlined her in this light green color. And we'll learn much more about Hope's story as the season goes on, but first, all you need to know is that she is nothing like Diosa. She's not. And next up, we have the Disciples, which I'll explain a lot better later on. But first, we have someone named Levitt. I'm not going to give you any spoilers about him or his story. Then we have Anders, we have Orlando, and then we have Doucette. Up here in this corner, we have Nikki and Hatch, and they are a part of the Allegius girlies. If you remember them, they were all the way back in season 5 babes. They were not introduced in that season, but they are obviously still a part of the Allegius girlies, so therefore I've put them next to and close to Diosa and the rest of them. And finally, we have Nelson. He is a member of the Children of Gabriel. He's like the only important one in this final season, so therefore I did give him a picture because he's semi-important this season. You may have also noticed that there are a couple characters missing, and that is because I did not put them on the board yet. They will be up later, okay? There's a few people in the Disciples that are not on the board at the moment, and I will explain that when we get to a particular episode. So the season picks up right where the last one left off. Bellamy's group, as they look for Octavia, who just vanished after being stabbed by Miss Hope up here, and she suddenly has no memory of what is going on. Bellamy is taken by hooded, cloaked figures.
For the rest of this season, they kind of pull a Kane in season 6, where he just did not show up at all. That's Bellamy this season. We will not be seeing very much of Bellamy this season, and there is a very specific reason for this. Bob Morley, the actor who portrays Bellamy, was bullied on set, or like there was a lot of drama between him and Jason. He was just kind of uncomfortable with the whole thing. He said that his mental health was kind of in the shitter. There was a whole cancellation happening. Him and Eliza Taylor, who plays Clark, got married in real life and cheated on their spouses together. A lot of people didn't want to choose to support them anymore, and a lot of people were very rapidly defending them. I personally don't care about the drama, but apparently Bob's mental health just got so bad at the time that he had to take time off from the show. It results, and I'm not saying this is his fault at all, in one of the worst possible storylines this season, and we're gonna get into that when we get to it.
After stabbing Octavia, Hope has absolutely no idea who anybody is. She loses her memory and says, "Who's Octavia?" And then she begins to run away. And this is when their camp suddenly is under attack by these cloaked figures. Meanwhile, back in Sanctum, Clark's group all share this giant mansion, I guess. So all the important characters, a part of one crew, now live in this mansion. And it's just like, why haven't we ever heard of this mansion until now? We catch back up with Hope, who finds a note buried in her skin, like in a little capsule, that says to trust Bellamy. And she's confused because she doesn't have any memory of Octavia or Bellamy or anybody. She just lost her memory as soon as the anomaly closed. So she's like, what the fuck?
There are so many people now in Sanctum, like hundreds of people here in Sanctum, and everyone is kind of fighting for the palace. Besides one crew, they don't really care about having the palace, but they care about keeping everybody out of the palace because they want to make sure that there's no divine leaders.
We see that Gabriel and Echo have decided to follow Hope through the woods, and all three of them try to evade these cloaked, hooded figures that are invisible. Back at the palace, Clark confronts Russell, who goads her into attacking him because he wants to die after everything that he's done. And Clark is like, fine, is this what you want? So she attacks him. She knocks over a torch and completely burns the palace down, walks out with Russell at gunpoint, and basically sentences him to death in front of everybody in Sanctum. Say what you want about this episode. This part absolutely devours. Clark is mothering here in this scene, maybe harder than she's ever mothered. So then we flash into Russell's mind space, and we see that randomly, just out of nowhere, Shade Haida has invaded his mind and taken his body. He kills the mind of Russell. So Russell dies, and now Russell is not really Russell, he's Shade Haida. We also see Gabriel's group of him, Echo, and Hope follow the Invisibles into the anomaly at the exact same time.
So the entirety of this episode takes place on May 6th, 2281. So episode 2 gives us flashbacks to the time that Octavia and Diyoza spent in the anomaly. We learn that time on this planet that they were taken to moves much faster than the time on Sanctum. About 90 days after Diyoza arrived on the planet is when Octavia ended up showing up, and obviously it was only a few seconds for Octavia. And Diyoza is about to give birth, so Octavia runs over to her and helps her give birth, and they live on this planet together with Diyoza's new daughter Hope for around 10 years. We learn that Octavia basically spent 6 years trying to get to the anomaly on this planet, which they call Skyring, which just so happens to be at the bottom of a giant lake that Octavia cannot reach. Diyoza destroys their one way off of the planet, makes it so that Octavia cannot leave because Octavia wants to go back to Sanctum and be with her brother. And keep in mind, Hope is 6. It has been 6 years for them, while Bellamy and Clark and everybody on Sanctum has literally not even noticed that they're gone. So a few years later, Octavia writes a letter to Bellamy and throws it into the lake, hoping that it will fall through the anomaly. These hooded figures that were later attacking Hope and Echo and Gabriel in the first episode show up, and they uncloak themselves and reveal themselves, and they reveal that they found out that somebody was on this planet because of the bottle that she threw in with the note in it. Hope goes and hides in like their living room area, and the hooded figures take Diyoza and Octavia away from Hope.
Meanwhile, in the present day on Skyring, we see Gabriel's group arrive. It is so hard to wrap my mind around this whole thing, but it's hundreds of years on this planet after Octavia left. We learn from Hope that she didn't actually stab Octavia, she tagged her, which is what ended up making her disappear and arrive on Bardo, which is a different planet from this one, which I will explain more about later. And Echo is already over this. She wants to get the hell off this planet, but Hope tells her that it's useless. Like, Octavia already tried for 10 years. We see that the group meet a prisoner named Orlando, who's been sentenced to 5 years alone on this planet.
We learn from Hope that Skyring, as she calls it, is a penal planet for the Disciples, which are the big bad guys that were in the cloaked outfits from the beginning of the episode.
So they go exploring on Skyring, and they see that Orlando basically dug up a bunch of dead bodies on the planet so that he wouldn't have to be alone for the next 5 years.
So Gabriel is looking at the dead bodies that the prisoner dug up. One of the dead bodies just so happens to be Colin Benson. Gabriel says that he knew him and that they are on planet Beta, which was one of the planets that Aegis III took colonizing missions to, and that Colin Benson was the captain of one of the colonizing missions. And at the end of the episode, we see that this erratic prisoner destroys their one and only way to figure out what the code is on the Anomaly Stone. So we learn in this episode that Diyoza arrived about 90 days before Octavia did on Skyring, and then they spent 10 years together on Skyring before getting taken away by the Disciples. And then we find out that about 500 years have passed for this planet in between Octavia and Diyoza leaving and Hope, Echo, and Gabriel arriving.
Then we see two flop characters. I think one of them's names is James, and he's a member of one crew. He is fixing the nuclear reactor down in Sanctum. However, he ends up doing it wrong, and him and his girlfriend die of exposure. We then see Clark and Gaia, who have become kind of besties at this point. It's a little weird. They bury the flame, and then Clark buries her mom's ring. Raven and Amori go down underneath to check out the reactor because James never reported back to Raven, and this is where they find the dead bodies, and they're like, well, shit, I guess we're gonna have to get someone to come in and weld the errors down below because radiation is leaking everywhere, and they need to get somebody to go down there and patch the hole while somebody else goes and fixes the reactor. It's here where Raven gets Hatch, who is one of the Aegis prisoners, to go down with like 3 of his friends to weld the leak down in the reactor, while somebody else, that being Amori and Murphy, go down to try and fix the reactor itself, which is still broken. And the radiation levels just keep rising. But Murphy, because he is a Nightblood, goes in and tries to help Hatch finish up the job. They finally get it patched, and then Hatch dies. Nikki, who is Hatch's girlfriend, comes in and attacks Raven because she's like, if you knew it was dangerous, you could have just told us. I'm sure we could have figured something out. But she attacks her because Raven didn't tell them that it was dangerous and that Hatch would probably die.
So the entirety of episode 3 takes place on May 7th, 2281. Episode 4 opens with a flashback to Hope meeting a new prisoner that shows up here on the planet. Back when she was 10, around 6 months after Octavia and Diyoza disappeared on her, she was literally just living on this planet alone for 6 months until this guy Dev arrives. And for the next 10 years, he trains her on how to be a disciple. However, this does not go as planned. Dev is shot by the disciples, and then that leaves Hope to reluctantly make the jump to Bardo herself.
Meanwhile, in the present day, we see that Hope basically tells Echo and Gabriel that they are going to be on Beta for probably like 5 years, because that's how long that the prisoner is going to be on the planet for, seeing as though she has experience with Dev. So we see their journey throughout the next 5 years. I believe it's like the next day is when they start planting crops on Beta. We learn that by 3 months later, Orlando has begun to get a little bit more close with them. He begins planting seeds with them so that they can turn him to be like on their side. We see that Orlando finally eats with them, and they have a long conversation about his belief system and how the disciples are basically right and that any other way of living is completely wrong, and that you need to be an emotionless machine, and that you need to have like no family, no friends, no bonds and connections. You need to basically just be a trained robot soldier, and that's his whole shtick. That's like that's what the disciples want. They want you to be a stern robot militarian man.
We also learned from Hope around this time that Octavia is in something called memory capture, which is essentially torture. They need to get to Bardo as soon as possible because her brains could be turned to mush, essentially.
We then see Orlando agree to train Echo, Hope, and Gabriel, and says that he will make them into disciples, and what they do after that is not his business, because when that bridge eventually does open and they get to Bardo, their plan is to obviously rescue Octavia from getting tortured. We then flash forward to 5 years later. We learn that Hope has a buzz cut now, and Echo has a pixie cut.
So this does not go as planned because Echo decides to turn on Orlando, and she ends up killing all the disciples instead of just knocking them out. She also decides to leave Orlando there, tied to a tree, which is one of her more questionable decisions, but I mean, I guess I would understand if you're trying to get back to Bellamy and you haven't seen him for like 5 years. Hope and Gabriel are like, what are you doing? Like, Orlando is our friend now. Clearly, Echo does not give a shit.
Meanwhile, Clark's group find a disciple's helmet that was out in the woods when they were snatching up Bellamy and Octavia from episode 1. We see Raven put the helmet on and see this like star map, and then she also sees that Clark is like a target to them, and it says like wanted on it. So she's like, that can't be good. So she goes to warn Clark about it. We also learn through the disciples that Orlando on Skyring killed himself after Echo and the rest of them abandoned him. So Clark and the disciples are in a bit of a stare down, and this is when Raven arrives and she kills a bunch of them, which saves obviously Clark and her people. This is when they decide to go through the anomaly to try and save Echo, Octavia, Bellamy. However, Gaia decides to stay on Sanctum, and after Clark's group leave, she is attacked by a remaining disciple who was playing possum. So Gaia is sent through the anomaly somewhere, and we see all of a sudden the anomaly stone just falls to the ground. So it's essentially turned off, and we see that Clark's group have arrived on an icy planet that we've never seen before. It's not Skyring, and it's certainly not Bardo, because there's no disciples to be seen. So they're like, where the hell are we?
The first few scenes take place between year 10 and year 20 on Skyring, and then the Hope, Echo, and Gabriel storyline takes place over year 500 and year 505, and then the Sanctum storyline takes place on May 7th, 2281. So we get a flashback to after Octavia was taken by the disciples to Bardo, back after spending 10 years on Skyring with Hope and Diyoza. She tries to escape the disciples and makes her way outside, only to realize that all the trees around her are not real. She's essentially in a dome. It's very Hunger Games-esque. She's then taken to memory capture, where she meets Levitt, who is one of the disciples trying to get memories out of her. 11 days later, Octavia is still fighting, but Levitt convinces her that struggling is going to make it worse and that she needs to just give in, reveal her memories to him. So by day 14, it is now 2 weeks after Octavia has started her memory capture journey with the disciples. Levitt has basically fallen in love with her, seeing all of her memories. We can tell he's not a very bad guy, just despite the fact that he's working with these terrible, inhuman people. We then see Hope arrive to Octavia from Skyring back in episode 4 when she left Dev. For Octavia, it's only been 14 days, but for Hope, it's been 10 years. We then see Levitt decide to help them, and he reveals to the girlies that each person has their own code, essentially, like their own mind code or something. He ends up scanning Hope's eye and tattooing the code on Octavia's back, which is the tattoo that we saw her with in season 6, by the way. And it's here where we see Octavia is sent back in episode 8 of season 6, I believe, and that's when she ends up on Sanctum with like no memory of the last 10 years. We then get a scene where Anders, who is the head of the disciples, tells Hope that she needs to go to Sanctum and bring Octavia back to Bardo. And it's here where we see the aftermath of Octavia getting stabbed by Hope in the finale of season 6.
We see Echo, Gabriel, and Hope arrive on Bardo, and they are obviously disguised in disciple gear, and they are trying to find Miss Octavia Blake. She's been missing for quite a while, and I would like Mother to be found. They finally find Octavia in the memory extraction chair, and she is in a complete trance, okay? And this is when Echo watches some of her memories, and
we're finally brought back to speed with Octavia's storyline here. Octavia is then taken to MCAP again, but before she is, they tell Octavia that her brother, Bellamy, is here. Hello, Bellamy. This is the first time we've seen you in episodes. Octavia tries to talk him down, but this disciple decides to be an idiot and pull on a grenade, which explodes and kills Bellamy, ?
So obviously livid about this, she kills one of the disciples, and they break Octavia out and go try to head for the Anomaly Stone again. In Clark and the others' absence, we see on Sanctum, Indra is basically kind of in charge now of One Crew and everybody else in Sanctum. There's a big group of Russell supporters. Obviously Russell is dead, but nobody knows that because it's obviously Shade Haida in his mind. One of the faithful lights themselves on fire in protest to Russell's arrest. This is when Murphy, who's still pretending to be Daniel Prime, by the way, arrives and stops them from burning anybody else because they have like a whole like group of children that are ready to get burned. And he says, absolutely not, babes. That's not what I want. I am Daniel Prime and you will listen to me. But they find out that he's not Daniel because Daniel's boyfriend basically comes out and is like, you didn't want to kiss me. You don't remember me. You're not the real Daniel. So then they get him ready basically to get burned. And that is when Russell, aka obviously Shade Haida, arrives and is still playing the part of Russell terribly, by the way. He's a little too mean and stern, pardons Murphy, and tells his people to stop trying to kill Murphy. And he also makes his people bow to him, and this is when it's tipped off to Indra that he is not Russell, because she remembers the kneel or die slogan, the political slogan, if you will, that Shade Haida had back from her childhood.
So this episode takes place from day 1 on Bardo to day 45 on Bardo, and then on Sanctum on May 7th, 2281.
So in this episode, we catch up with Diyoza, who breaks out in a very slayful montage of her constantly being like tortured by the disciples, and she finally breaks out and runs into the group of Hope, Echo, Gabriel, and Octavia. Levitt advises them to go outside the simulated trees outside and go beyond that. Gabriel does not trust this because he learns that it's toxic and that it could kill them. So he turns all of them in. He turns all of them in, including Diyoza, and they are locked up again. Meanwhile, back in Sanctum, we see Indra tell her guards that Shade Haida is not to leave his cell and that he will be under 100% supervision going forward. We also learn here from Indra that all of One Crew's guns have suddenly just disappeared and have most likely been stolen by the Allegis girlies, aka Nikki, because she wants revenge for what Raven did to Hatch. We see Indra go to Maddie for help in reuniting One Crew to get them to help look for the guns with her. This could not have gone worse because Jackson, Murphy, and Amori arrive and basically tell her that making Maddie lead one crew is not a very good idea right now because she doesn't have the flame in her head. But Murphy and Amori convince Indra to lead her people herself and basically take over the job of commander, even though she doesn't have the flame. And she eventually does it, and she goes and gives a slayful speech. This is one of the best monologues that she's ever been given. On the snowy planet, we learn it's called Nakara. We see Clark's group find a bunch of dead bodies just buried in the snow, and they come to the conclusion that it must be their cemetery planet that they go and like bury their dead at, which is kind of funny that they have like a whole new planet just for that. Like, so they enter this cave and they are immediately attacked by these little alien weird little creatures, and they're able to fight them off, but then they realize that the cave is like shifting around them, and they get separated from each other in like two different groups, and this is when they realize that they are in a living organism. The cave is a living organism, babes. So Raven is using the helmet to kind of guide her to the stone, because there's like a map to the stone that's in the cave.
And here in the cave, we see that there is like a banner that has the Second Dawn logo on it. Interesting.
So everybody on Nakara is reunited, and they eventually make it to the stone, and they put in the code to take them to Bardo.
On Bardo this episode, we are still on day 45, and as for Nakara, we are still on May 7th. Assuming that Nakara is located in a similar proximity to the black hole as Sanctum, and then Sanctum takes place on May 8th, 2281.
So we see that Anders up here, he's the lead of the disciples. We've kind of learned that before. He recruits Gabriel to help decipher the stone, a process that they've been doing for like hundreds of years at this point. So he agrees to join them basically right away because he turned his friends in. We see Octavia and Echo are locked up together, and this is kind of an awkward scene if I'm being honest with you. Octavia comforts Echo, who is just an emotional wreck over Bellamy's death. Octavia kind of seems a little bit out of it. I don't want to say she doesn't care, but she's not really showing much emotion when it comes to her brother's death, probably because she's been like literally in a trance for the last 2 or 3 weeks at this point. So it kind of makes sense, but also it doesn't. So she comforts her, and it's so funny because these two used to be arch nemesis, and now they are like friendly. It's kind of weird.
It's here where we get a flashback to 2153 on the Ark on the ring, where Bellamy and Echo share their first kiss.
We also see that the Diozas are in a cell together, and Hope basically tells her mother about all of the things that she's had to go through the last 10 years, I guess the last 15 years now, to get reunited with her mom. And by the end of the episode, Octavia, Echo, and the Diozas decide to agree to join the disciples because that's clearly what they want them to do. And so they agree to train with them and become disciples and fight their last war. Meanwhile, in Sanctum, we see Amori wants so badly for the children of Gabriel to be reunited with the Sanctumites and rejoin their society. So she hosts this reunification ceremony. This does not go well, however. Nelson ends up killing his birth parents after his dad called him an abomination. And we finally do see that Nikki and the rest of the other Allegius prisoners are the ones that stole one crew guns, and they arrive, basically partner with the children of Gabriel to take over Sanctum from one crew. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Shade Haida is playing chess with Murphy in his cell, trying to distract him from what's happening in the palace. And at the end of the episode, back on Bardo, we see that Clark's group arrive, and this is when they confront Anders and the rest of the disciples to figure out what the fuck is going on. This is when Gabriel, who has been working with the disciples now for 3 months, by the way, this is 3 months after the first part of the Bardo story. So yeah, Gabriel tells Clark that Bellamy is dead, and that's where the 7th episode ends. You may have noticed that there are some characters missing. So to start out with, I've given Bill Cadigan a bigger picture because it is revealed here that he is the leader of the disciples, and he's still alive due to cryogenic sleep. Anders, who is the like head of the disciples, wakes him up, and it's revealed that he is really like the mega leader of the disciples, and that the Second Dawn cult from season 4 that was like never really expanded on again is actually the ancestors of the disciples, because they've been living on Bardo for like thousands of years because of the time dilation. But he's still young because he is always in cryogenic sleep, and he's woken like every few years to be given information about the last war.
Episode 7 takes place on day 46, and then the last scene takes place on day 136 on Bardo. The Sanctum storyline takes place on May 9th, 2281, and then the flashback takes place at some point in 2153.
Just a brief explanation about the other characters I put on the board. These are Cadogan's children, and we're gonna learn a lot about them, like a lot about them in the next episode. And then this is Cadogan's wife. And we're gonna learn a little bit about her, but she's not really that important, but I decided to put her on the board. The episode begins with Clarke and Raven deciding to stay strong for Bellamy, who they just were told is dead. This is when Anders brings Cadogan out to have a little chat with Clarke, who obviously they believe is the key to this last war, we've been told. The disciples believe that Clarke still has the AI in her head, that being obviously the flame in her head, and they only got this belief from Octavia's memories of it going in Clarke's head back in season 3. So Clarke, obviously being the smarty that she is, pretends that it is still in her head. It's here where Clarke recognizes Bill, and she's like, I know you, and she figures it out. He tells her that they were not a cult.
So there's like this extended flashback this episode that's really interesting, but I don't think I want to talk about it all the way here. We just get some more insight as to how the Second Dawn bunker and everybody in the Second Dawn bunker back during Prime Fire went from the Second Dawn bunker and found the Anomaly Stone and then went to all these other planets. I do think I'm gonna do a separate video on that episode because that was supposed to be like a backdoor pilot that ended up not getting picked up. So I think I'm gonna make a whole separate video on that episode. Basically everything you need to know is that the Second Dawn bunker turned into the Disciples. This episode basically tells the story of that.
And then we flash forward back to the present day where Clarke and the other girlies are still basically in a stare down with the Disciples. So we see Octavia, Echo, and Diyoza are all working with the Disciples. I think I already kind of mentioned that. And in the next episode, we're gonna learn like about the time period of when they were training with the Disciples. But in this episode, we just learn that they are completely committed to the cause.
So in the present day on Bardo, this episode takes place on day 136, and then the flashbacks take place from 2052 to 2054. So this episode details the 3-month journey that Hope, Echo, Diyoza, and Octavia took to become disciples. They take a tour of the planet with Anders, and he reveals to them that this planet Bardo used to be inhabited by the Bardoans, which was an ancient alien species, I guess, who lost their last war, and they ended up getting turned to crystal. This is one of the aspects of this season that just kind of doesn't really make sense until you get to the final few episodes. We also learn that the disciples do not procreate the way that normal humans do. They raise the embryos in these tubes, and then the community of disciples all raise the baby so that the baby doesn't form selfish ties.
Hope is a little bit of a failure. She's kind of failing like every single one of the tests that is put in front of her because of her disdain for the disciples. And you'd think that she would be the one to pick it up the quickest because she spent, what, 10 years with one on Skyring, 5 years with another one on Skyring. And the next day, Echo is really just picking things up right away. Like, she is kind of slaying just a little bit. She is outperforming everybody in the tests that they give her. At some point, it's like probably like 2 months later at this point, almost 3, we see Octavia has begun a slay little relationship with Levitt, who was obviously the guy that was doing the memory capture back in episode 5 that she has kind of had a flirtation with ever since. We then see it's the day before Clarke and her group arrive on Bardo. Octavia, Echo, and Diyoza pass their tests. It's kind of giving Divergent just a little bit, like they have to go into some kind of dreamlike state and kill their mother, their best friend, or their daughter. For example, in Diyoza's simulation, she would have to kill Hope, or in Hope's simulation, she would have to kill Diyoza. Hope actually fails this test, and she does not kill her mom in the simulation, and this is kind of like their final test to prove that they are willing and able to be disciples. And Echo, who is now a respected member of the disciples, is given the task of sentencing Hope, and she sentences her to 5 years on Planet Beta. I mean, I know we're pretending here, but girl, that's quite excessive. Back on Sanctum, we see Nikki, who is obviously partnered up with Nelson and the Cogs, basically is taken ownership of the palace. She demands that Murphy and Raven get their asses down to the palace because they are in trouble. And it's so funny because nobody in Sanctum even knows that Raven and Clark are missing. Like, they literally just think that they are out in the woods somewhere. They don't even know that they're on a different planet. Because on Sanctum, it's only been like 2 or 3 days. Oh yeah, Nikki also demands Russell, who she definitely knows is not Russell. And basically her plan here is to get the Primes, aka obviously Shadehaida, Murphy, and Emori, who are obviously pretending to be Daniel and Kaylee, to reveal to the faithful that their Primes are dead and that they're not actually Daniel, Kaylee, and Russell, which would send the faithful into chaos and disarray. So Indra and the others take back control of the guns and honestly just lets the Sanctumites kill Russell, aka Shadehaida, now that they know that he's Shadehaida and not their god. However, this does not work out well. This does not work out well. Everybody in the room, every single person is slaughtered by Shadehaida, obviously still wearing Russell's skin. And Murphy, the idiot that he is, reveals to all of one crew that Shadehaida is alive. And because Shadehaida still has political pull, half of one crew is now choosing to follow this man. I don't like this storyline. I don't.
So this episode takes place from day 47 to day 135 on Bardo.
At the beginning of the episode, we see Shadehaida confront Maddie and scare the living shit out of her before he returns to the palace and broadcasts his message to all of Sanctum. He is the king now. He is the commander again. Everybody is to bow down to him, essentially. So even though he doesn't have the flame in his head, one crew all now basically have to support him or else they are going to get executed. However, the next day, Indra has a plan to fight Shadehaida in a slayful fight scene. So Maddie gets involved and Indra decides to sacrifice herself for Maddie. She doesn't die, but she like gives her life for Maddie, and Maddie ends up running away, and Shadehaida makes Indra work for him and bow to him as one of his subjects. However, there is a resistance led by Murphy and Emori down in the nuclear reactor, which is the safest place in Sanctum somehow, even though just a couple of episodes ago, it was literally about to blow up. And back on Bardo, we see Clark's group negotiate with the Disciples, specifically Bill, in order to see their friends, see Octavia and Echo and Diyoza. And we also see here that Echo is actually playing both sides. She isn't actually that good of a disciple. Frees Hope from her prison. Obviously, before Hope could be sent to Beta, she gets freed by Echo, and Echo tells her plan to use the Gem 9 in order to crystallize the entire planet, and obviously that would allow all of their people to make an escape. Meanwhile, Cadigan shows Jordan and Gabriel the sacred text, I guess, that they have that proves that this final last war is coming. We then finally see that Clark is reunited with Octavia and the other girlies, and they mourn Bellamy together. Hope arrives and tells everybody that they can get acquainted later because Echo is going to use the Gem 9 and they need to get the hell off the planet and get to the bridge before she does, so that they can save themselves from getting turned into crystal. However, Octavia and Clark's group decide to head for the Gem 9 room in order to stop Echo, who is clearly out of her mind. Oh yeah, we also see that Jordan figures out that the last war isn't so much a war and more of a test because he knows Korean, and apparently the Bardoan language is very similar to Korean, I guess, so he's able to figure out that the Disciples just completely mistranslated the whole text. We see that Clark, Octavia, and Raven's group stop Echo from literally committing a genocide. Anders arrives and basically detests them and says that all of them are selfish and not willing to die for the cause, not willing to be a part of the Disciples. This is when Hope is so irrational. This girl, I really wanted to like her. I really did. She is just so stupid. She literally kills Anders, who drops the Gem 9 syringe that he took from Echo, and so she grabs the syringe, runs to the water supply, and tries to commit the genocide that was just prevented. And then Diyoza runs up to the water supply and puts her hand underneath the drop, and it immediately turns her to crystal. Hope not only kills Anders, but also her mother in trying to commit genocide. But Diyoza ends up saving everybody on Bardo, which is a very heroic act. And I'm honestly very upset that they killed Diyoza here, not going to lie. She's one of my favorite characters, but yeah, I can't believe we traded out Diyoza for Hope. Like, she is just so stupid. I'm so sorry.
The Sanctum storyline takes place from May 9th to May 10th, 2281, and then the Bardo storyline is still on day 136.
So, the 11th episode is a little bit of a different episode. We catch up with Bellamy. No, he's not dead. He's just been MIA, and this whole episode is dedicated to him. So, Bellamy fans kind of eating just a little bit. The beginning of the episode sees Levitt, who is examining one of the other disciples and reading through their memories, when he sees that Bellamy, the day that he supposedly died back, I think it happened during the 5th episode, ended up falling through the anomaly and didn't actually explode into a bunch of pieces. He fell through the anomaly with Conductor Doucette. And that's what this episode is about.
So we learn that Bellamy is alive, and this episode details his story on a completely new planet that we've never seen called Etheria. Bellamy ended up falling through the anomaly with Conductor Doucette, and over the course of 3 months, they become very good friends, and Bellamy is essentially red-pilled into the disciples and made completely different character, by the way, by the end of the episode. He is willing to take a leap of faith by the end of the episode to jump off of this huge-ass mountain in order to reach the anomaly below. We also learn here that Bill Cadigan spent a couple of months here on this planet as well, and he found the Cave of Ascent. It's essentially a cave that holds another alien species called the Etherians, who actually did transcend, unlike the Bardoans, as told to us by Conductor Doucette. The disciples' goal is obviously to transcend and turn into those like beings of light instead of getting killed by the Gem 9.
So they return to Bardo, and Bellamy has a chance to finally reunite with people like Octavia, Clark, Echo, Raven, shall I go on? And instead of embracing his friends and family, he decides to turn his back on them and reveal to Cadigan that Clark does not have the flame in her head. Okay, that was a choice.
So this episode on Bardo takes place day 139. It's been a couple of days since Clark and her people have arrived. Meanwhile, on Etheria, it takes place over 100 days because Etheria and Bardo have the exact same time dilation.
All right, so episode 12 takes us to Sanctum. We see that basically everyone in Sanctum is kneeling to Shadehaida and following his every wish. The only ones who actually refuse to do this, however, are the children of Gabriel, who are all assassinated. So that basically, I think there's one that's left over that Indra ends up taking to the Resistance. The Allegis prisoners, including Nikki, are siding with Shadehaida because they think it's like the best thing that they can do for themselves to not get assassinated, obviously. And Shadehaida basically forces Nikki to follow Indra and infiltrate the reactor. However, Murphy, he sees right through this, so everybody in the reactor basically ties her up and makes it so that she can't go rat all of them out to Shadehaida. We then see the Anomaly Stone is brought to Shadehaida, who's just on the biggest power trip at the moment. He thinks he's the king of the castle and that he's going to reign over Sanctum forever. So they bring the Anomaly Stone from Gabriel's camp out, prop it up on this giant like table thing that can barely hold it up. And later in the episode, we see Shadehaida find Murphy and Emori's resistance down in the reactor. And back on Bardo, we see Bellamy bargaining with his shepherd to, I guess, pardon his people on one condition. Bill says if he can bring the actual flame to Cadigan, then he will pardon everyone, all of Bellamy's friends. Raven and Echo obviously lie to Bellamy and say that they have no idea where the flame is, and Bellamy's just trying to get the flame for Cadigan because he's in love with him, apparently. Oh yeah, we also see the flop storyline. Jordan and Hope are now flirting, I guess. I don't know. Hope, you literally just killed your mother in the last episode. Is this really appropriate? We see Bellamy confront Octavia and Clark in their cell, and they are just disgusted by him. They are like, what happened to you? They basically refuse to talk, and Bellamy sends Clark to MCAP as well. And after a lot of fighting, Clark eventually agrees to take them to the flame. The disciples end up sending Hope, Jordan, Miller, Nyla, Echo, and Octavia to an unknown location. They are on an unknown planet. We'll see what comes of that later, but Clark, Bellamy, Raven, and Gabriel go to Sanctum with the disciples to get the flame. And that brings us to the end of the episode where Clark and the disciples group arrive and see that things have changed. Things have definitely changed. Shadehaida is now in charge. Indra is now working for Shadehaida. There's a resistance of Murphy and Amori down in the reactor. That just makes for some excellent chaos next episode.
So the Sanctum storyline takes place on May 10th, 2281, and then the Bardo storyline takes place on day 140, so one day after Bellamy arrives on Bardo.
So at the beginning of the episode, Shadehaida, he is taken over by the disciples who have all arrived. Basically, they detain him. They detain anyone who goes against them. Murphy and Raven are kept as leverage, and Clark goes to get the flame. The red sun eclipse happens, and the everybody starts going crazy again. There's antitoxin being thrown around. From inside the reactor, we see Amori take down the shield, which allows the bugs to get in and causes more chaos.
So due to the red sun toxin that's out in the air, Gabriel is kind of losing his mind a little bit. He's hallucinating Josephine, and she is telling him to use the memory drive repair thingies to repair the flame and then put the flame in his own head, and that would be able to give Bill everything that he wants.
So Clark returns with the key and hands it to Cadigan after his people get the reactor open. We also get a really nice moment here where Raven apologizes to Nikki about the whole Hatch situation, and Nikki changes her mind about Raven. She lets Raven live with what she's done, and so that kind of wraps up Raven's whole storyline this season about her overcoming her demons. We see that Indra, who is under the influence of the red sun toxin, begins to see flashes of her mother bowing a knee to Shadehaida, obviously in the past. She's actually able to break out of the disciples' captivity, and she decides to leave Shadehaida there to die. She doesn't actually kill him, but she leaves him there to die because she remembers what her mother had to go through and what her family had to go through back when she was a little girl. And then the most fuck-ass thing happens. Gabriel tries to save the flame, like he snaps out of it and then decides to shoot the flame, completely destroying it, like beyond repair. Oh yeah, and then he shoots Doucette, who is obviously Bellamy's bestie. So Bellamy's bestie Doucette is dead now. Basically the deal's off. Clark takes control of the situation. A lot of the disciples are dead. They take Cadigan prisoner and make him take them to Octavia and the other girlies who are hidden. And before stepping through the anomaly, Clark basically banishes Bellamy. She tells him that he is not welcome with them wherever they go. He's not allowed to come with them because he's completely betrayed them.
It's here where the most fuck-ass shit happens, okay? Shadehaida, right as Clark is about to walk through the anomaly, looks over at Bellamy and is like, I can help you. Shadehaida tells Bellamy that Maddie's sketchbook that Shadehaida has on his throne holds the secret to the test. The code is in Maddie's sketchbook, essentially. Clark overhears this and walks over to Bellamy and is like, give me the book. We're gonna have a fight right now. Give me the book. She pulls out her gun and shoots the other disciples, and Bellamy is unwilling to give her the book. And in the most fuck-ass moment this entire show, the worst decision the show's ever made, Clark shoots and kills Bellamy. Bellamy drops the book, and there's one more disciple left alive, and Clark doesn't even grab the book. She runs through the anomaly, a sobbing mess. When I tell you the outrage of this specific moment is giving me war flashbacks right now, we were in the trenches. We were really in the trenches for this episode. So the entirety of this episode takes place on Sanctum on May 10th, 2281. I think what they did to Bellamy's character here is just some of the worst writing that this show has ever done. Jason really just likes to do shock value death, and this is just one of those examples, along with Lexa and Lincoln, that are just really poorly done, in my opinion. Like, they kind of teased it during season 4 where Bellamy wanted to open the Second Dawn bunker to get Octavia and all the other people in, but Clark tried to shoot Bellamy and then she realized that she couldn't do it. So they kind of teased it before then, and then her leaving him to die in the pits in season 5. It's not unprecedented, okay? These two have tried to kill each other before, but I think Clark killing Bellamy is just one of the worst decisions they could have made, because the final 3 episodes really feel kind of boring. I'm not going to lie. After this episode, all the tension is gone. Not all the tension, but a lot of the tension is really just fizzled out, because you're asking your audience to really sit through 3 more hours after you kill one of its main characters, like one of its 2 leads. And the other lead is the one that killed him. I think most people stop watching here and they don't continue watching after this episode.
So after the whirlwind that was episode 13, just all of the energy is kind of sucked out at this point, and a lot of the fans stopped watching here. They didn't even continue with the final 3. But yes, there are 3 episodes left, so let's get on into them. We learn that Cadigan ended up sending Octavia's group to Earth. That's where they've been the last day or 2. All the way back in episode 4, I think it was, Gaia was taken there as well, because if you remember, they, on Sanctum, one of the disciples found her and knocked her out, and they fell through the anomaly, and the anomaly stone ended up shutting off for a while on Sanctum. Yeah, they ended up falling through to Earth. So that's where they are. They are in the Second Dawn bunker that is apparently still around. I don't know how it hasn't collapsed at this point. At the beginning of the episode, we see Cadigan use one of those pills. He literally swallows it, and it's like a tag thing, except it's a pill, so you swallow it and then you immediately disappear. So he disappears back to Bardo, and this is where we see Clarke reunite with everyone on Earth, and she tells them all that Bellamy is dead.
Where's Bellamy? Clarke? Dead. I killed him. I had to. Maddie's sketchbook. He knew that she still has the memories of the commander. She would never be safe. I begged him to stop. I tried to get the book back, but I tried everything. I promise I tried.
And nobody has a correct reaction here, not a single one. I mean, Echo is a little upset for a while, but she ultimately understands. Octavia, she's upset, but she's also like, you did what you had to do, girl. The Octavia of season 4, 5, and 6 would not be saying that. I don't care if she's 10 years older. I feel as though they kind of just completely changed her character to be this forgiving, non-violent person, which I understand that comes with age, and then also being the aunt to Hope and everything, but it's still girl, I would be more upset than, you did what you had to do, girl. It's okay. Oh yeah, and then Clarke just destroys their one way off Earth because they don't know where the anomaly stone is, so she destroys the helmet because she claims that everybody that she loves is there. Obviously, Maddie came over with her from Sanctum, and everybody else from Bardo is there, so all their friends are on Earth right now, so let's just live on Earth. And that is just not the Clarke that I know and love, I fear. So then we get a series of scenes that just really suck the life out of the show for me. Jordan and Hope drink together and they dance and they have a good time. Gabriel is playing the piano. It's useless. We see Octavia and Indra refuse to go into the bunker because they don't want to face their demons of what they had to do down there for 6 years back in season 5, which feels like a million years ago at this point.
Meanwhile, on Bardo, we see that Cadigan arrives and tells Shadehaida, who is now kind of his prisoner, to go to Earth and find Maddie and bring her to Bardo.
So Shadehaida arrives on Earth and he finds Maddie. He actually stabs and kills Gabriel. Gabriel, who's just trying to play piano and show Maddie how to play piano, is stabbed and killed. Maddie ends up getting away from him though, and Indra and Gaia try to fight him off, but he uses the locator tag to stab himself and leave for Bardo. Minutes later though, Clarke and the other girlies find Maddie, and she ends up using the knife that Shadehaida apparently left there to stab herself because she doesn't want anybody else to die, seeing as she just got Gabriel killed. So she uses the locator tag to stab herself, which takes her back to Bardo. And at the end of the episode, we see that the disciples send a bomb through the anomaly, and they bomb the bunker. He throws it in this small room and prevents a cave-in. However, we see that Murphy and Emori are in a hallway that's near that room, and that hallway comes crashing down on them. So both of them are buried under rubble.
So the Bardo parts of this episode take place on day 145, and then the Earth storyline takes place on May 11th, 2281.
Things are not looking good for Emori. After the cave-in the last episode with the bomb, she's been stabbed by a giant metal rod. Meanwhile, we see Clarke and Octavia take some of the locator pills that Cadigan had to try and travel to Bardo because they still don't know where the the anomaly stone is. So Raven actually finds Shade Haida's helmet that he was wearing when he was in disguise as a disciple. She puts it on and uses it to find where the anomaly stone is. So they bring Emori to the anomaly stone, and it's underground. So they have to use like a giant hammer to dig it out of the ground. Murphy and Raven start digging, and by the end of the episode, they are able to take her back to Sanctum, where they have the proper medical supplies to treat her stab wound. Meanwhile, on Bardo, we see Maddie is in MCAP overnight, and she is just completely being torn apart by that thing. And Cadigan is looking for information on how to start his last war, like what he's supposed to do, because he doesn't have the flame with him. We also see Levitt make his way back to the bridge, and he lets Clark and Octavia in because they took those locator tags. But Octavia and Clark are found by the disciples because they moved the bridge out on a field. And so yeah, they are immediately locked up again, but they are found by Levitt and set free. They also find Shade Haida in his cell. He's been taken prisoner by the disciples because he was unable to bring them Maddie, so he's just kind of useless in their opinion. Free Shade Haida and use him as a distraction by getting him to kill a bunch of disciples. They run to Maddie, who is basically paralyzed at this point. Levitt looks through her memories and sees that Cadigan has gotten the final code and that he's out taking the test as they speak. So it's here where Clark tries to put Maddie out of her misery by shooting her, but Octavia says she's willing to do it for Clark because she doesn't want Clark to have to live with that. This is one of the only aspects of this final season that I really like, is Octavia and Clark's renewed friendship, because for the longest time they were either enemies, not friends, or just cordial to each other. But I'm really glad this final season kind of mends their relationship a little bit, and I love that they are now really close. Like, it just, two favorite characters right there. But yeah, Levitt reveals to them that Cadigan got the code to start the test, and so Clark decides to leave Maddie alive for the time being so that she can go in and stop Cadigan and the test, because he should not be the one to take it, according to Clark. And that, my friends, is where the penultimate episode of the show ends.
So the Earth storyline of this episode takes place on May 12th, 2281, and then the Bardo storyline takes place on day 149.
All right, so I'm gonna do my absolute best here to try and explain the finale. It's a lot, okay? It's a lot. So if I miss something, or I misunderstand something, or I misexplain something and I don't explain something correctly, please feel free to let me know down below, because I am incredibly bad about doing episodes like this where there's just a million different things going on. Honestly, not even going to lie to you, this finale, not even that bad, in my opinion. I think episode 13 with the whole Bellamy death is really just like the lowest they can go. It kind of recovers a little bit in the last 3 episodes, it's just, it takes a while. And the final episode, in my opinion, is not the worst that it could be. That being said, there are some stupid decisions that they make in this episode, and there are some good decisions that they make in this episode. So, without further ado, let's get on into the finale of the 100. Raven's group of Murphy and Jackson arrive on Sanctum with Emori, and Jackson tells Raven that she can't really help much more with Emori's surgery, so she needs to go back to Earth and help unbury Echo and Nyla, who are trapped in another part of the bunker. Back on Bardo, Clark is just going ham with these disciples. She's killing them left and right, and Levitt is like, yeah, I don't think we deserve to survive if this is the last that humanity has to offer.
We see Cadigan is finally taking the test. He is confronted by the judge, and this judge is not God, kind of an alien species, I think is what they refer to it as. I don't think they necessarily say that this judge is like the creator of everybody. That's why I don't think it's like a god, but it is a higher entity, and there is a society of all of them, and they are a collective mind, much like Allie wanted to be a collective mind. And this alien is taking the form of Callie, his daughter. And right as he's about to answer this judge's questions, Clark comes right out of nowhere and shoots him in the head during the test. Well, if you weren't gonna pass with Cadigan, you're definitely not gonna pass with Clark.
Meanwhile, back on Earth, we see that Raven has brought Nikki and the rest of the Allegius prisoners, who are our friends now, and she has them help dig up Echo and Nyla, who are trapped under some rubble. And then she brings all of the One Crew warriors and Sanctumites and basically everybody from Sanctum to Bardo. Back on Sanctum, due to complications during her surgery, Emori unfortunately succumbs to her injuries and dies. Murphy, however, gets the idea to put her mind drive in his head, which obviously would cause him to die, as we've seen with Clark and Josephine in season 6. That did not go well, but Jackson does the surgery anyway, so there's that. We see Octavia and Levitt reunite with Raven and Echo, who all leave to go and try and stop the war. Raven leaves to go and find Clark, who's in the middle of the test, by the way, and it's not going very well. And everybody else goes to the battlefield to try and stop the Disciples versus One Crew.
We then see the judge disappear and then reappear. This time, the judge is none other than Lexa. Mother has returned, not really, but the judge basically judges Clark and says, yeah, you do not deserve to transcend with the rest of us. Like, humanity is not doing well right now. You guys are on the verge of war. You just killed somebody in the middle of the test, and you're asking for transcendence. So Lexa tells Clark that they are not going to transcend. Humanity is going to get turned into the Gem-9 crystal giants. So Clark leaves the test, and then Raven finds her, and in the chaos, as Clark leaves to go be with Maddie for her final moments, Raven is called out to by the Anomaly Stone. So she goes into it, and the judge takes the form of none other than Abby.
Back on Sanctum in Murphy's mind space, he reunites with Emori, who's obviously not really there. It's just her mind drive in his head. And they have a cute little dance moment, a really cute moment for their relationship, even though they are both going to die and Emori's body is already dead.
Abby takes Raven onto the battlefield on Bardo and shows Raven that this is the exact reason why you guys do not deserve to transcend like the rest of us.
Shadehaida is about to start the war. Like the shooting hasn't started yet, but he starts it. He starts it. They start shooting at each other. All he wants to do is go to war. He tries leading One Crew. This is when Levitt, Echo, and Octavia arrive to the scene to try and stop the war. Levitt is shot, and Shadehaida reveals himself to all of One Crew, who are honestly not having any of his bullshit anymore. Andra walks out and uses one of the Allegius prisoners' sonic cannons to completely destroy him. So Shadehaida is finally fucking dead. And then we see the most slayful speech in all of Octavia history, okay? As an Octavia stan and loyalist myself, this was really amazing for me. Like, she gave a slayful performance here. She's telling everybody on both sides. She stops the fighting, by the way, stops the shooting, and tells everybody that they need to listen to her, okay? There can't be a Sky Crew, and a Tree Crew, and a One Crew, and all these different clans, and the Disciples, and the Allegius prisoners, and the Primes. There can't be this tribalism anymore. They all need to come together as one group of people in order to transcend.
During Octavia's speech, the judge begins to see everybody, like all of the humans in the vicinity, put their guns down and come together. And this is when the judge decides to reverse her decision, along with some persuasion from Raven.
Everybody on the battlefield begins turning into that golden ray thingy. Everybody's spirit moves on.
So the cruel joke here is that Clark, because she killed somebody in the middle of her test, is not allowed to transcend like the rest of humanity. So she heads from Bardo to Sanctum and finds Picasso, the Sanctumite's dog, and she takes Picasso to Earth to see if there's any survivors there. His sanctum was completely empty. There's just more beings of light and more beings of light. She can't talk to anybody. Their consciousness has transcended. But the dog runs away and Clark is left alone again. It's here where Clark is joined by the judge on the beach, and Clark's like, "Why are you here? Did you come to gloat? Did you come to judge me more?" She reveals to Clark that transcendence is a choice. And then the judge is like, "Until now, nobody had ever decided to live instead of transcend."
They won't join us when they die. None of them seem to care.
Clark then looks and sees that all of her friends decided to stay with her on Earth,
including Octavia, Murphy, Emory, Gaia, Indra, Nyla, Jackson, Miller, Echo, Jordan, Raven, Levitt, and Hope. I think that was everybody. I'm pretty sure it's 14 people. And the dog Picasso from the Primes. Clark ended up finding Picasso and taking her with her.
Everybody on this planet, all 14 of them, will not be able to procreate. And therefore, when they all die, humanity will be completely erased. There will be no humans left. I mean, they will all be transcended in the higher consciousness. Really did close the door on this show, and I don't think many shows do that. I think a lot of shows make it so that maybe 10 years down the line, they can return for like a spin-off or a one-off episode or a movie. But this show is not going to get that because nobody can have children and there's no other threat besides all 14 of them, so what would the point even be? So the Earth and Sanctum storyline takes place on May 12th, 2281, and then all the scenes on Bardo take place on day 150. So that means that this show ends on May 12th, 2281, meaning that the main story spans 131 years, 7 months, and 29 days, or 48,088 days.
So yeah, that is the 100. This is the finished board. Everybody who transcended, I'm just gonna go ahead and count them as dead because they're not on Earth as of the last few scenes. Maddie, even though she technically didn't die, I put a cross on her because I feel as though like she's not around on Earth, so she's dead, essentially. That is the 100. 14 survivors as of the final few scenes. If you also include the dog, it's technically 15, but a very interesting ending to the show. I honestly would not have expected it to go down this route, but here we are. If you want to take one final good look at the finished board, here you guys go. I just want to say the amount of Scotch tape, the amount of markers, the amount of erasing and redrawing, and the amount of retaping and the amount of reprinting and everything that had to go into this board is kind of crazy. To think that I started this board back in November and it's over now. I'm filming this in March and this video should be out sometime in April. I'm not going to be doing any more videos with this board ever again. I'm not going to get rid of the board. Don't worry. I'm keeping it because it's very sentimental, obviously. I love this show so much.
I think that the ending of this show is just okay. It's not as good as it could have been, but it's also not as bad as it was the first time I watched it. I do think the final episode is a lot better than like 3 or 4 episodes before it. Obviously, the returns of Alexa and Abby as the judge was an interesting way to go. I don't think having just another war would have been beneficial for this show because this show has seen so many different conflicts, and how can you even top yourself? I feel like they made the right call here to make the final war a test instead. I think the anticlimactic killing of Bill is an issue here. Besides that, I don't have many more issues with the finale. I like the fact that there are characters still alive because for a second I thought that Clark was just going to be the only one left. After all the heartache and pain and just terrible things that these characters have had to go through because of you, Jason Rothenberg, I think that this happy ending is deserved. Overall, despite the dodgy last season, this show is still so special to me, and I'm sure it's still special to all of you, even though a lot of people boycotted this show after the deaths of Lincoln and Lexa and Bellamy, those being like the main ones that people were really upset about. There's still something so special about this show, and I hope I did it justice with this series. It's been so much fun, like a ton of fun. If I missed anything in this series, please go down below and let me know. Without further ado, I believe that brings me to the end of this video and end of this series. Please be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe, turn on the notifications. I will see you guys in the next video. And as always, may we meet again.